Thank everybody for being here this morning and appreciate your attendance. And if you are visiting, we're very honored to have you with us. Hope that you can come back and be with us again. If you will, take your Bibles out. I'm not going to have anything on the screen. You're not going to have to turn a lot. Turn to Hebrews 11, what Joe just read. And we're going to talk about faith and kind of examine, this passage here. We kind of sometimes call it the Hall of Fame of faith and people. It's what faith looks like. And I would like to compare how is your run in the race with faith compared to what's laid out in some of these verses here. As Joe and I was pulling in this morning, nobody was in the lot over here, and Joe looks, there's no cars over there. People must have known you're preaching today. I said, well, thanks for the encouragement, Joe. I really appreciate that. Good way to get started. So anyway, he told me I couldn't dog him up here, but he started out dogging me this morning. But anyway, so I appreciate him reading that. It's a little lengthier than normal. He told me, he said, well, everybody be asleep by the time I'm done. I said, no, they might be when I'm done preaching, but not with that. Faith, in verse 1 there, it's the faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So, what is our faith? Can we visualize things that we haven't seen? And, we're going to talk about heaven today and where we're really out there. I just want to look at just some of these people here and what they did and their examples that they did. In verse 4 there, by faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, God testifying of his gifts, and through it he being dead still speaks. You go back to Genesis 4, most of you know the story of Cain and Abel, the brothers. They were told to worship God, offer sacrifices. Abel's was pleasing to God, Cain's wasn't. As a result, Cain ended up killing his brother. But yet, to sum it up for us, worship God the way He tells us to. I'm going to try to just make this simple in these things and try to come to a simple conclusion. If we worship God the way He tells us to, it's simple. If we don't, it can be difficult. And, you have to be here to worship. And I'd like to encourage people tonight. Brother Al Dotson, they moved back to Wabash here recently, and they've been out in Nevada for the last several years, right next to California there. And Al used to worship here many years ago, so I'm looking forward to hearing him tonight. Max and Lee Dawson, Lord willing, will be here Wednesday night. They'll be in town. He'll be preaching for us. I encourage people to come hear Max Wednesday night. I'm sure we'll hear two great lessons. So, but we can't worship if we're not here. So I encourage people to be here. Verse 5, Enoch here. By faith, Enoch was translated so that he did not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. For before his translation, he had this testimony that he pleased God. Can we say the same thing today? Make pleasing God our reason for living. Is our reason for living, is it for our family? Is it for our wife, for our kids, our work, our employment, our goals in this world? Or is our reason for living pleasing God? It says here that's what Enoch did. And that's what we need to be doing. We've got to please God. Verse 7 here. By faith, Noah, being divinely warned of things not yet seen, moved with godly fear, prepared an ark for the saving of his household, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is according to the faith. Back in the day of Noah, when there had never been a flood or anything, could you imagine the ridicule and the things he went through, people making fun of him? But yet, he wanted to be pleasing to God. Reverence God by following His instructions. Noah followed God's instructions to the T. Can we say the same thing as Christians today? Are we following God's instructions as Noah did? That he pleased God. There about Enoch. So move with godly fear here on Noah in verse 7. Do we do things, are we moved with godly fear by the way we live our lives, by the things we do or don't do? Noah did. He didn't care what people said, the ridicule and people making fun of him, but yet sometimes we kind of want to fit in with the crowd and not be that way. Noah wasn't concerned with that. He had the faith and he wanted to reverence God and follow His instructions to the T. Verses 8 through 16 here, I'm going to talk about Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob here. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would afterward receive as an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going. I mean, think about that. Today, we have cell phones. Used to we had maps and everything, but with navigation systems in our vehicles, our cell phones, it's almost hard to get lost today. I mean, you can say something to Siri on the phone and she'll tell you where to go and guide you where you need to go. And it's not maybe always be accurate, but still, back then, and here we're going to talk about the state in tents and things, the unknown, the unseen, the uncertainty, but yet the faith that Abraham had here. Verse 9, by faith he sojourned in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Is our foundations of our life, is God our foundations, Jesus Christ part of our foundation, or are we more worried about worldly foundations and building our treasures there? Verse 11 here about Sarah. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. And we know the story of Sarah, who was way past the age of having children, but yet God's promise was that she would have a child. So it just, the example there of what she did. Verse 12, therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. These all died in faith, not having received the promise, but having seen them afar off, were assured of them, embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims of the earth. For those who say such things declare plainly that they seek a homeland. And truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come, they would have had opportunity to return. But now they desire a better, that is, a heavenly country. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Verse 16 there, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God. Can God say that about us today with our faith and the way we're living our lives? We need to examine that. This world is not our home, but yet sometimes we want to get so comfortable in this world. We want to have treasures here on this earth. We want to build up for things here. We want to have a comfy retirement and things, but yet, look at Abraham and his family and the faith that they had. They weren't concerned about this world and things of this world. They were building up and getting things set for their heavenly home. And that's the faith that they had. Do we have the same faith that they had back then? And if not, we need to. Abraham here, verse 17 through 19. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received this promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said, in Isaac your seed shall be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from which he also received him in a figurative sense. Here's the story of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham finally gets the son that he was promised, that the seed was going to continue through him. And I think it's hard for us to even fathom taking our only child up, getting ready to offer sacrifice to God and kill them as if God told us to do that. I mean, can you even fathom that? I mean, I don't know. It takes a better person than me that I can't even fathom that, and just the great faith that Abraham had that God was going to take care of things. Kind of sum that up. Trust God to work out the details. Too many times, we think that we've got to figure everything out and we've got to have A through Z all lined up and ready to go. But yet sometimes we just need to do what God tells us to do and let God work things out. Let Him take care of things. He's told us what to do. We need to do it. Verse 20 here. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. If you remember the story back in Genesis there in 27, Jacob and Esau were the two brothers here, and Isaac was their father, and with the mother, Jacob got the blessing from Isaac, his father, rather than Esau being the older son. They tricked him and got the blessing. And, it's a way to look at this would be sometimes God's hand can even work by our mistakes. So, here was something that wasn't supposed to happen, but yet still, God can still work through things and stuff, and He worked it out and got it going and kept things going. But yet, that doesn't give us a reason to try to do something different according to what God tells us because we think God's going to work it out. We still have to follow God and do His will and what He wants us to do. Verse 21, by faith Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of the sons of Joseph and worshiped, leaning on the top of his staff. I think a lesson here is worship God till your dying day. Some people might receive Christ earlier in life and live a Christian life their whole life. Some people become Christians midlife, maybe later in life. But the thing we have to do is till the day we die, we have to be living the life that Christ and God wants us to live, to have the faith that Jacob had here. Verse 22 here, Joseph. By faith, Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the departure of the children of Israel and gave instructions concerning his bones. Trust God's promise, and with Him, it's not if, but when. We're all going to die. We don't know when, but yet we need to trust what God says and be ready. I can't help but think of Artie Sr. here because I was told that just in his last day or so that he was giving instructions to the children and things of what they needed to do. And it just reminds me of this verse. Was that a true story, Artie? He's nodding, yeah. So, I remember that. His last moments and stuff was giving instructions to the people he was around. And that's what this verse is talking about, what Joseph is saying here. So, there's an example there. And, are we going to be doing the same thing, or are we going to be worrying about worldly things, or getting things set up for our heavenly things? Verse 23 here, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw that he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's command. We get concerned sometimes about whether the government or the law here or whatever about, what if we get persecuted, or what if they can't say, we can't go to church, which some parts of the country, this goes on, and there's some parts of the country that Christians are getting persecuted and even put to death for standing up for Christ and proclaiming Christianity. But yet here, Moses' parents, they had trust in God's providence. Do we have trust in God's providence? The king put out a decree because all the newborn male children he wanted put to death. But yet Moses' parents here decided, no, they weren't going to do that. They were going to try to take care of their child and follow God's command rather than man's command. So just the providence of God, we have to have faith in that, and we have to be willing to follow that. Moses grew up here, and verse 24 here, 24 through 26. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Here Moses, a lot of times we want what we might call easy street, and what's the easy path here? What can we do and lay up our treasures here on earth and stuff? But yet Moses didn't choose that. He could have chose that. He could have lived a life just to sit back, take it easy, and had everything that he wanted. But he didn't choose that. He chose God's way and following His way with the people of Israel here rather than the Egyptians and stuff. So, are we doing the same thing? He kept his eyes on the unseen. things here, we can see things, do things, and it's a lot harder sometimes to focus on the things that we can't see and what's going on. But yet Moses did. Verses 29 and 30 here. Read verse 29. By faith, by faith they passed through the Red Sea by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. Here's a situation where it's hard to fathom that. And, if you've watched any of the movies, they'll put it in there. But yet, this great sea, and then the waters just split. And, if water goes off of land, we have rain, it takes time to dry that up. But it was dry land. So just the miracle of splitting that, parting the Red Sea, and having dry land to walk across, and then the walls of water on both sides. That just had to be, just bizarre, and it'd just be amazing to see that. But yet, here the children of Israel were able to walk through. But then the Egyptians chasing them, the walls collapsed on them and they were killed. And, the story here, if God says go and don't question. And here again, kind of as I mentioned earlier, how many times do we question things and I don't know, or if this or if that. We just need to do what God tells us to do. Let God take care of the rest. And we get so wrapped up in things in this world and what ifs and this, that, and the other that there's no need to do that. And, can you imagine? I know sometimes as an employer, and whether sometimes your children or if you have employees, or I know John's a supervisor, but it just drives you crazy when you tell somebody to do something and you don't have time to argue with them, and then they want to argue with you or they want to challenge you on it. And it just, John, does it drive you crazy when that happens? And you just want to just say, shut up and do it. And, but can you imagine God, the frustration that He has? We get frustrated with that, and, we're not infallible. We sometimes may make wrong decisions or tell somebody to do something that is kind of maybe stupid to do. But yet still, can you imagine God when He knows what He's talking about and He's right about everything, and that we at times, whether we know it or not, challenge God and kind of act like God doesn't know what He's doing or saying? And we get frustrated and we get upset, but can you imagine when we aren't pleasing to God and we basically challenge Him on things and basically say, God, you don't know what you're talking about, how upsetting that is to God when He knows He's right. Now, we think we're right, and maybe we are most of the time, but yet, God's right all the time. But yet still, can you imagine how He gets upset when we challenge Him on things and stuff? Verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. The same thing. They were instructed to walk around the city 7 times of Jericho and to blast the trumpets, and the walls would fall down. It may seem a little bizarre, but yes, they still followed what God said and had results. Verse 31, Rahab here. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with all those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. She took care of them. She had faith in God, and so she was taking them in and helping them out. So, according to the evidence, we need to act according to the evidence God has given us. And a lot of times we don't. And, why don't we? We need to do that. Go back to verse 6, which I didn't read that, but Joe read it. But without faith, it is impossible to believe Him. If we don't have faith, we're not going to be able to believe God. We can't believe God without the faith. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. We got to believe that God is a rewarder, but there's a condition there, of those who diligently seek Him. Can we say that we're a person or that we're a Christian who is diligently seeking God? If you think at times, if there's something out there that we're really wanting, whether it's a certain outfit or a vehicle or whatever, a lot of times we'll set our mind to that. We'll really work for that. We might have to plan for that, and we are diligently seeking to do that. You don't see a basketball game going on without those guys diligently seeking that they're going to put that basketball through that goal. The football team, they're going to try to get that football across into the end zone. The soccer team, there's a net there. Those guys are working to get that ball in that net. They're diligently working to that. Can we today say that we're Christians who are diligently seeking Him? That's a question that each and every one of us has to ask ourselves. We diligently seek a lot of things, but a lot of things and everything on this earth does not matter. It's the heavenly things that matter. And that's what we've got to be seeking. There's plenty of evidence that God will reward you if we do what He wants. We've read about Moses there. He lived a life reward driven, and what he did, verses 24 through 26. We talked about Enoch there in verse 5. God took Enoch, but yet Enoch was pleasing to God. So there's a result of what happened there. Noah, following God's command and doing what he did and having the faith, he was saved there in verse 7 along with his household. And everybody else in the world was destroyed. God prepared a city for Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Sarah there. Verse 23, Moses' parents, the faith they had, their child was saved as a result of the faith they had in what they were doing. The walls of Jericho, verse 30 there, they fell as a result of the faith that the people had. Rahab, we just read there in verse 31, her life was spared because of the faith that she had. Do we have the faith that these people had? Verses 33 and 34, which we haven't read here, read, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of the weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. So here, we're talking about Joshua and the conquering the kingdoms and the promises there. If you remember the story, the children sing about Daniel in the lion's den, and the lion's mouth was shut. The faith that Daniel had there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, but yet God spared their lives for their faith and what they did. David escaped the edge of the sword. Saul was trying to kill him and stuff, but yet what he did. Gideon, as far as the foreign armies and fighting and things, the faith that he had, and God helped him. So, do we have the faith that these people had that was demonstrated today? If not, we need to have that faith. And there's times I think that our faith kind of wavers or goes back and forth, but yet still, we've got to have the faith that's demonstrated here in Hebrews 11 and diligently seek God and what He wants us to do. There's a lot of times that we go through things. Today Roger and Vonda and their family are going through a lot with the loss of their mother. And there's been so many people here that have lost parents and loved ones here lately and stuff. And, that is going through a lot. And, we've got to encourage and help and stuff. And that's a difficult time. But, with the faith of God and what He can do for us, we can get through these situations and stuff. And there's other situations at time, whether it's ailments, illnesses, sicknesses, other things happening and stuff. But yet, if we have the faith of the mustard seed in what God tells us to do, it's not this life that matters. It's the next life that matters. We're all going to stand before God in the day of judgment and answer for everything that we've done. There's two, I hate to say almost goals. Heaven definitely is a goal, but there's two places that people are working towards. It's either heaven or hell. It's one or the other. There's no in between. So, where are we at today? Are we working towards heaven, or are we working towards going to hell? And, it boils down to those are our two choices. And so where am I at today in my faith, in my life here on earth trying to get to one of those places. Where is your situation today? Where are you at? If you've not become a Christian, you don't have a hope of being in heaven with God in Christ. If you turn over to Mark, read a passage, Mark here, 16, 15, and 16 that we're familiar with. And he said to them, this is Jesus talking here, so this is a command from Jesus. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. So there's our two choices on what we're going to do. So if you've not become a Christian, you don't have that hope of being in heaven with God and Christ for eternity. You need to become a Christian. We offer that chance to you today to do that. And a lot of people here have become Christians and living a life, but the life we're living, is it the life and having the faith that we should or not? And if not, why not? So if there's anything that we can do for you in your life in becoming a Christian, or praying for you that things might change, that you might have the faith that you should, please come as together we stand and sing.